The year is 1999, a year many would argue is one of the best in cinema history. The indie darlings of the early 90s have matured into studio pioneers. David O. Russell, David Fincher, Alexander Payne, and others have taken Hollywood by storm. Yet, Steven Soderbergh, whose debut film Sex, Lies, and Videotape was instrumental in ushering in the era of American independent film, has spent most of the past decade weathering one storm after another. But after his success with Out of Sight, Soderbergh is on the comeback trail, and now he's back to his lower budget roots with the Limey. Will Soderbergh keep his momentum going, or will he fall back into the malaise that defined his 90s output? The answer is complicated.
I guess you could say Soderbergh's career is just like the movies he makes. It's not always arranged in a logical order either.
No, and that's what makes him so fascinating. It's why he's the subject of the first season of the Filmographers Podcast, the show where we study a director's entire career, one film at a time. I'm Michael Moreci.
And I'm Keir Graff. We are interested in the big picture. As Mike said, this season we're turning the spotlight on Steven Soderbergh, discussing why each one of his films succeeded or failed, looking at it in the context of the Hollywood landscape at the time it was released. Above all, we want to know how working artists make a life in the arts.
Yeah, as we're learning, we also tend to look at why movies succeed and fail. Which brings us to the Limey.
You tell him! You tell him I'm coming! Tell him I'm fucking coming!
Keir, you know what to do. Describe the Limey in just one sentence.
And I'm not going to use my Cockney accent this time. A hardened British ex-con, frozen in time since the days of swinging London, comes to LA to learn the unpleasant truth behind his daughter's death at the hands of a sleazy music producer, and teach the locals a lesson in Cockney rhyming slang.
Keir, perfect as always. If there was an award for one-sentence summaries, you'd be really up for it. I would not. I am not good at this. I don't really enjoy it either. I don't enjoy the task. We just spent the last episode gushing, rightfully so, gushing over Out of Sight. It is one of my all-time favorite movies. Top 5. I love it. I don't enjoy the Limey quite as much. I do love the Limey, but it's not quite at that same level. But a good amount of gushing is still in order here.
Mike, I'm going to blow your mind. I like this movie more than Out of Sight, and I like Out of Sight a lot. It's such a subjective thing, obviously. My rankings on films I love can change from week to week, certainly year to year. But as much as I think Out of Sight is probably technically a better film, it obviously appeals to a wider range of people. And there's just so many things that are wonderful about it. I mean, that the casting and the acting and just, it's certainly an amazing adaptation of an Elmore Leonard novel. But for me, watching the Limey is kind of a superior artistic experience. It's also an extraordinarily well-made movie, which makes it even more remarkable when you think about how quickly they made that film. But to quote film critic Matt Seeger, with the Limey, I think the style adds substance. I think he said that so well. And I recognize that I may be in the minority with my opinion about the Limey. Limey has a lot of fans. It's not, most people probably wouldn't rank it above Out of Sight. But in my first rewatching of both of these movies for these episodes, the Limey just sucked me in and transported me in a way that Out of Sight didn't quite manage to do, much as I love it. Ultimately, they're both great movies with different strengths. And as I said, I reserve the right to change my opinion next year.
Well, yeah. Well, you know what's weird about the Limey, and I was just thinking this as you were talking, like, I wonder about the release strategy, because you look at what it's sandwiched between. It's like Out of Sight, the Limey, Aaron Brockovich, which we'll talk about, next episode. But it's just like, it's such a smaller movie. I know it's a smaller in budget, but like, I remember when it came out, and it was really a blip.
Yes.
And I don't know. I'm just curious about that. But now that I've gone back, and I'm sure you have too, I have found a lot of appreciation of the Limey that has only seemed to grow over the last, 25 years.
the appreciation for it has grown over time. I think we both referred a couple times to the Matt Seeger's piece for RogerEbert.com that was a 20-year retrospective. That's the word I'm looking for.
Appreciation, I don't know.
Anyway, it happened 20 years later. It is one of those films I think that film fans just cherish, and a certain kind of film fan, and particularly film fans who love, Get Carter and Point Blank, which we'll talk about, but it's just, so it's not that it doesn't have fans. I think for me, almost the simplicity of it is what is so appealing. It is so linear. And I mean, for a nonlinear movie, it's quite linear in its focus. As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I mean, it's and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, more. Soderbergh is just the master of complex simplicity, I guess. I'm going to run with that phrase.
I like it.
But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Like, I don't really like revenge flicks. Like, they're really not my thing. Although, like, I really like Get Carter and Point Blank. So maybe I do like the revenge flick after all. But like, it's economical. It's sleek, it's stylish, like it's cool enough without being, ostentatious, which is also another Soderbergh thing that I really appreciate. Like, he just knows enough to be like, I'm finding ways to elevate this above the thing that you expect it to be, whether it's like just manipulating time or how he shoots, these gorgeous wides and the coolness of the available light and all these things that he's doing. Like, he finds really ways to elevate stuff without being like, look at me. Like, I read an interview where he was like, nobody wants a director in front, like waving their hands as, some directors, Quentin Tarantino, do.
You've got to hit your Quentin Tarantino cough button there.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Again. But I mean, you look at the difference between like Kill Bill versus the Limey and dear God.
Yeah, it's so funny you say you don't think of yourself as somebody who likes revenge movies. And I think I would think of myself the same way. But then when I was rewatching Get Carter for the whatever time recently, I was like, I love that movie so much. So maybe I do also like revenge movies, but I'm sort of particular about them. I maybe don't like a Liam Neeson revenge movie as much or a Tarantino revenge movie as much as I like some of these classics.
And I think what we're talking about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to talk about Get Carter for a second.
Yes.
Because I really like Get Carter. I like Get Carter. And by the way, we're talking about the Michael Caine Get Carter, not the Sly Stallone Get Carter, just to be clear.
That one doesn't actually exist.
No.
Fortunately, that was just a bad dream that a lot of us had simultaneously in some sort of parallel dimension. So actually, the only version of Get Carter that exists is the original with Michael Caine.
Is with Michael Caine.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's it. And it's weird because I actually have to disagree a little with something Soderbergh said, that he said it's a cold movie. I don't find it cold at all. Like, I think it's a really emotional movie. There's a scene, and while we say we do share spoilers, I'm not going to share spoilers for movies that aren't the focus of the episode. So I'm not going to spoil Get Carter. But if you've seen Get Carter, listeners, and I know you have, there's a scene in which it's maybe towards the end of Act 2. It's almost towards the end, where Carter learns the reason why his brother was murdered. And it is, first of all, horrifying. Like, yes. This moment is so dark, like so terrible. And I've never seen the Stallone version, so I don't know if they even get into that. It's so grimy that like the emotion that you feel, like the power then of Michael Caine's vengeance is so good. And I really, really find that such an important part of the movie. And what makes me love it so much is that like it goes to a dark place and it really recontextualizes everything and makes it really powerful.
I think it's a dark movie, not a cold movie. So I agree. I disagree with Soderbergh a little bit. That, I mean, a lot of that, the actions are brutal, and Caine's character, Carter, acts very coldly to people at times, but his vengeance is driven by a deep personal grief. I find Point Blank to be a colder film, if we're speaking in that way. I partly because, you know, Lee Marvin's great, but he is, talk about a performance that is very, so hard-boiled. It's beyond hard-boiled. What's beyond hard-boiled?
God, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's Lee Marvin.
Lee Marvin, beyond hard-boiled. Yes, I agree. He's in, I like that movie for some, different reasons. It's a fascinating movie. It's so fun to look at.
Yeah.
But that performance doesn't involve me in the way Keynes does, or certainly Terrence Stamp's. I mean, of these three films, Terrence Stamp indisputably to me delivers the greatest performance.
Yeah, no, he does. I mean, it's such a layered performance. Feels like such an honest performance. And there's overlap between Get Carter and The Limey, where the main characters, Kane and Stamp, learn a little bit more behind their revenge quest that, like I use the word again, recontextualizes everything. And it's pretty devastating and we'll talk about, I'm sure, in detail, and this will be a spoiler. When Terrence Stamp finds out why Jenny was killed, it's pretty gutting, and it forms the end, which again, we'll talk about. But point being, they both have this emotional element, and Point Blank doesn't. And I do like it. I like the idea of this guy that's so just driven, like, because he's still killing people after I think that's what I love about that movie. Is like, he's still killing people after he's achieved his revenge. He kills Mel like midway through the movie. And sorry, that is a spoiler, but that movie's, 67.
Can't spoil. Yeah. A movie that old is fair game for sure.
I agree. So do you want to go to a break and come back and talk a little bit more in depth about The Limey?
I do indeed.
So, Keir, you have another book out.
Sort of. It's called The Poison Puzzle, and it's a middle grade mystery I wrote with none other than James Patterson, which is still fun to say. It's actually the paperback version of Minerva Keene's Detective Club, which came out last year. So it's an old book in a new format with a new title.
I'm guessing the marketing department was involved.
People think the Illuminati run the world, Mike, but it's really marketing departments. Anyway, I do love the new title, and the cover is fantastic. And if any of our listeners have readers in 4th or 5th grade or thereabouts, I hope they'll check out The Poison Puzzle. I don't want to give any spoilers, so I'll just say it's a mystery set in Chicago that I describe as Harriet the Spy meets Only Murders in the Building.
Oh, does that mean there's a Hulu series in the works?
From your mouth to God's ears, Mike. I mean, the marketing department's ears. But book 2, The Double Trouble Puzzle, comes out next year, along with a nonfiction book I can't announce yet.
2 books in 1 year.
Well, if Steven Soderbergh can make 2 movies a year, the least I can do is write 2 books.
Well, as long as you don't start operating your own camera, I'm fine with it.
You can find The Poison Puzzle anywhere books are sold, and you can order signed, personalized copies from the Filmographers' favorite bookstore, Exile in Bookville. Find them online at exileinbookville.com or look for the link in our show notes.
Usually at this point of the show, we talk about a movie's reception, but I'm going to put a pin in that for now.
Mike, are we about to go non-linear?
Yeah, we are. Non-linear and meta, because we're going to discuss the Limey structure, which I find to be so fascinating. Because, first of all, Soderbergh didn't shoot it the way Lems Dobb wrote it, much to Dobbs' frustration. Speaking of, quick sidebar, which this is the reason I think why we're here. This is the same Lem Dobbs who wrote Kafka, which we talked about before. But more than that, more importantly, and I know Keir is dying for this, I am as well, Dobbs joined Soderbergh for the Limey's commentary track, and it is excruciating?
Excruciating is a good word. It is also remarkable that Steven Soderbergh allowed Dobbs to come on the commentary because he obviously knows what kind of rapport they have or lack of rapport. Soderbergh strikes me as he demonstrates his humility in so many different ways. But one of the biggest ways he's demonstrated his humility to the world at large is to allow the screenwriter for the Limey to come on to his director's commentary and then basically bitch him out for the length of the movie.
Yeah, it feels like some sort of like bizarre religious ritual where you have to be totally debased or something. Because
self-flagellation.
Yeah, because and Soderbergh takes it with such poise and such calm, and I mean, once in a while he'll be like, "Yeah, well, you direct a movie and you tell me how it shakes out," But generally, Dobbs is just complaining and upset about every single choice that gets made, and Soderbergh is just kind of taking it. I mean, it's really something like, and the weird thing is that Dobbs is wrong about everything that he's saying. Like, Soderbergh is right. All the choices he made and all the stuff that Dobbs wanted to be in, like the stuff, especially, he's like, I just thought it was about family. I thought it was about family and this guy's family and this and that. And I was like, I don't know why you think that's so important.
Most of Dobbs's complaints are, I think, almost indefensible in terms of the story. And he even makes, what is it? They get into some great exchange. Maybe we can find the audio where Soderbergh is basically just trying to remind him that, you know, the audience is the only opinion who matters. And he says, you know, don't you think that I, as the director, also have to cut things out that I personally like? But at this point, it's in the service of the story. And Dobbs just keeps defending things that are kind of like he was attached to because he wrote it. And I get it. I mean, as writers, we've all had things edited out that we like. But if we're pros, we can recognize when our personal favorite thing isn't the thing that ultimately serves the reader or the viewer or whomever. And some of the stuff that Dobbs just goes on and on about, or like this family stuff where he writes these whole crazy subplots, like family relationships for the two assassins.
Yes.
Or, when Terry Valentine, the Peter Fonda character, goes to the house in Big Sur, Dobbs wants us to know that it's actually his ex-wife's house, and she's there, and she like chews him out this extended like harangue before he gets to be at the house. I was like, that would have just been death to the movie. I don't get it at all.
Yeah, I mean, the hitman thing too, like he wanted them to stop at, I believe it was Nicky Cat, his sister's house.
Yeah.
At some point, I don't know where
on the way to Big Sur, stop at Nicky Cat's sister's house.
It's like, who gives a shit? Like who, this movie, like you said, this would just be grind that movie to a halt. I forget how long it is. Maybe it's an hour and 40 minutes, something like that.
It's a nice tight film length.
It's a tight length. Clearly Soderbergh, you know, he's doing a little more handheld and natural light stuff. He's learning and doing stuff pretty fast. Like, so I think he wants to like shoot, edit, and be done, you know, more than that. And like adding these extra days and days. It's not only just like the choices, but it's like, Dobbs, this is like, you're talking an extra week of shooting.
There's a moment where Soderbergh says, wait, you actually think viewers are upset because they didn't get to know more about the family lives of the two hitmen? And Dobbs says, yes. And then he says, your movies are all too short. This should have been 10 or 15 minutes longer. Ugh.
No, very seldom can you make a case where you can say this should have been longer. I don't know who in their right mind is like, you know what this movie needed was more.
I'm old school. I think pop songs should be 3.5 minutes. I think films should be like an hour 45, maybe. Yeah. You know, novels should be a good 350 pages. Like, I don't know. It just feels like there are obviously always examples of exceptions that are excellent at greater lengths, obviously. And I'm usually on the writer's side, but in this case, I'm just 100% Team Soderbergh. I think Dobbs he just comes across as a crank, and he also comes across as really obsessed with reading reviews. During the commentary, he mentions reviews at least 4 or maybe 5 times, where he talks about what reviewers say and what reviewers said about the screenplay and how Dobbs is so misunderstood for his contributions. It's like, I'm sorry, like if you're in film, you just understand it's a collaborative art. The public may not know the full extent of your contribution. That's just the way it goes. Toughen up, Buttercup. Yeah. And Soderbergh, like, just sort of calmly, frankly says, you know, I really don't care what the reviews say. And to his credit, again, he has shown such equanimity and poise talking to Dobbs. He only gets a little testy with him once in that entire hour and 40 minutes of Dobbs' complaining. Pretty impressive.
Pretty impressive. Good for you, Soderbergh. I appreciate it. One other thing to your point, like about like, yes, I agree. I am in that camp too. Like, I'm like, you know what? If Casablanca can get it in under 2, so can everybody else. And like, but then people point out like, well, you know, what about Lawrence of Arabia? It's like, well, what about it? You know, like, yes, it's one of the greatest movies ever made, but we're going to also conveniently, you know, like, just ignore all the other historical and musical epics that were all 3 hours and suck from that time. Like, are we just going to forget about those because there's one Lawrence of Arabia?
It's very funny that you mentioned that too, because I remember on the commentary, Dobbs also quotes David Lean as saying, never pop up out of the same hole twice, when he's complaining about Soderbergh's use of Cockney rhyming slang, which he thinks is insufferable. Soderbergh says it occurs 3 times in the movie, but they're arguing. And so like Dobbs, who's arguing for fewer instances of something, quotes David Lean, and Soderbergh dryly says like, oh yeah, David Lean, he's known for his short, tight films.
Exactly.
I could quote this all day. Any rate, do yourself a favor, listen to that Criterion, or it's not Criterion, it's just a commentary track. Listen to that commentary track on the Limey. It delivers.
It does. We're learning that Soderbergh makes some tremendous movies, but also tremendous commentary tracks. Schizopolis, where he interviews himself, is amazing. Just listening to Neil LaBute try to be important.
Why does he let these people on his commentary track?
Why does he do this to himself?
But it does make the genre of the commentary track, it absolutely more interesting than otherwise.
And you know what the good news is? We're not done with Len Dobbs. Soderbergh works with him again, which I don't understand. Haywire, soon to come.
Oh.
Yeah, that's another Dobbs joint.
Good old Dobbs.
Good old Dobbs. Okay, so let's get back to the movie. This non-linear narrative is a product of shooting, not the script. So what I want to know, Keir, like, what do you think of Soderbergh's decision to cut the film this way? And do you think it was the right decision?
Absolutely, it was the right decision. It's what makes this movie exceptional. I mean, he goes all in with the nonlinear stuff and the overlapping dialogue. And I mean, watching it with the commentary track, which is almost like having the movie sound off, you realize even more how much it is a visual pastiche. It is just a remarkable job of editing. So last week we were talking about the way nonlinear stuff is becoming a Soderbergh trademark and like how effective it was in Out of Sight. And it's effective, here too, both in the larger framing of the story and in the way he edits individual scenes with the dialogue overlapping different shots. It's a very effective device for portraying someone lost in memory, stuck in the past, as we know this is a memory piece. And he uses this to just unbelievable effect to kind of trap us in the minds of this man who, we don't know how many regrets he has when he gets off the plane, when he comes to LA, but by the end of this film, he's really going to have regrets. And talk about, I think this is something Soderbergh said in one of the interviews I consumed, which is that, people say that you can't show somebody thinking on film, but you absolutely can. You just put the camera on Terrence Stamp and watch his eyes, and you see thought going on, and then the editing style is kind of reinforcing what's going on in that cranium of his. In the way this also foreshadows the devastating reveal at the end on the beach when Wilson realizes his culpability in his daughter's death. In a way, it's such a simple ending, and again, spoiler, but when he finally realizes that the reason she was killed was because she was constantly threatening to call the cops on him when she was a girl and he was a criminal in Britain. And he knew it was an empty threat. And he even tells, I think, Luis Guzman it was an empty threat. And then we realize that Terry Valentine doesn't know it's an empty threat. And that's why she had to die. In some ways, it's such a simple plot device, but it is agonizingly effective because of all the work that Soderbergh has done with this kind of nonlinear stuff where we've seen her as a girl. We've seen her with these amazingly artful shots. I don't know what the name is for that lens flare thing where the lights kind of streams upward in the frame. Yeah. I assume that's that's some sort of a filter and not a treatment of the film, but
probably, yeah, I think so.
It really traps you in the past in this just brutal way. The last thing I want to say on that, and I'm kind of going on at length, but this is just one of the reasons I love this film so much. So it's like maybe the most fascinating instance of the way he films this is there's the famous kind of walk and talk scene where Wilson is explaining his life. He kind of opens up finally, and he's explaining it to the acting coach that had befriended his dead daughter. And he tells the same story in 3 different contexts, like in her apartment, on a walk, and then in a diner. And then Soderbergh intercuts them, and he sort of says that, yes, in a way it makes no sense, but viewers never question it because They understand that when you're looking back and you're trying to recall who said what, where, you don't always remember. But the gist of it is there. And it's just it's an art film, but it's one of the most effective art films I've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree with you on all counts. I mean, there's that latent tragedy in all of it. The first line of the movie is "Tell me about Jenny," and it becomes so powerful by the end because he's in this war within himself of like wanting to know about Jenny, but also not wanting to know about Jenny, which is the daughter that, to be fair, he probably didn't know. She left. He was in prison. She left, moved, halfway across the world. And the truth that he actually finally learns about Jenny, on the beach with Peter Fonda, is the truth that is going to, put him in an emotional cage for the rest of his life. I think that's one of the great things about what also makes this an art film. It's why I love, when people do interesting things with the revenge genre, that's when I really love them. Like Mandy, I thought was an interesting movie. Like, because by the end of that, Nicolas Cage has become the very thing that he fought, came to destroy, a worse version of the thing that he was trying to destroy. And it's a harrowing ending, that revenge leaves you that way. I think part of this movie is that, like, you have Terrence Stamp coming to revenge his daughter, and that somehow is going to set him free from the lifetime of neglect, I guess you can say, in a way that he wasn't never there for her. He was in and out of prison. He wasn't clearly a great dad, but he can come and do this one last thing and avenge her death. And what he discovers only makes his emotional condition worse.
Yeah, and in the hands of a lesser director, or it must be said, a lesser screenwriter.
I can't wait for the commentary track for this podcast.
Lem, you're more than welcome to come on and do a commentary with us. But yeah, in the hands of lesser artists, he gets his revenge and he gets back on the plane, and it's just a hollow exercise in vengeance. Mm-hmm. In the way that he is incriminated in his own act of revenge seeking, it becomes a real work of art. Getting back to that opening line, "Tell me about Jenny," it's so powerful because he's speaking it consciously in a way that he just wants to know what happened to her. But of course, subconsciously, he's saying, please tell me something about the daughter that I never really knew. Mm-hmm. One thing I forgot to mention earlier when talking about layers is just that for those who haven't seen the film yet, and I don't know what's keeping you, one of the things that makes it so fascinating is that for Wilson's memories of his own young adulthood, Soderbergh was able to actually use footage from a Ken Loach film called Poor Cow. It was Ken Loach's directorial debut, 1967. Yeah. And apparently one of the few films in which Terrence Stamp looked more or less like he does as an older guy, just a younger version. He didn't have weird hair or a mustache or anything like that. He amazingly in that plays a thief who is caught and convicted. And so Soderbergh was able to get permission to use that footage, and he uses it to such powerful effect. I know there are a few people who have found that a little jarring about this film. I think it's just absolutely wonderful. So rarely in film do we get to see kind of people age before our eyes without some bad CGI or like some terrible prosthetic effects.
Right.
Richard Linklater's Boyhood is one of the few examples I can think of where it's so. Anyway, it's just such a great little layer on an already richly layered film.
Yeah. It's funny how many films are threading through this, and I know you had another point about Get Carter and Point Blank, which I think I'll tee you up for with this, because like you mentioned a few minutes ago that it's a memory film. Interestingly, Steven Soderbergh joined John Borman, the director of Point Blank, for the commentary track for Point Blank, which is interesting. It's another Soderbergh pairing that's very amicable, though.
No fireworks.
No drama. John Borman is very generous, and Soderbergh is very curious. But in that track, Soderbergh himself calls Point Blank a memory film. You know, for those who haven't seen it, it's a little hard to describe, but it has a similar like elliptical structure, not quite as strong as the Limey. The ellipticalness falls away midway through, but it's, you know, Lee Marvin's character gets shot by his best friend in the beginning, and he's out for revenge. And through the whole first quarter of the movie, you're flashing between him getting shot and then him getting off and then him returning however long later. So it has this like this intent of being like his memory. And there's been some questions of like, what is actually happening in the movie? How much is real? There's some fascinating things when you start looking at it. But he calls that a memory film, and then he calls Limey about memory time, focusing on a guy, and this is Soderbergh's own words, a guy who cannot stay rooted in the present. So you have that use of First Cow, which is really interesting that he was able to do that. You have this structure of Point Blank. Then you have Get Carter, which you had interesting thoughts about.
Well, yeah, rewatching all these three together is so fascinating to me because they are so strongly connected in my mind. Now, again, on the commentary, Dobbs claims that they really weren't thinking about Point Blank, which
lies.
He's got to be lying. It's, you know, as you say, Point Blank doesn't go as far in the kind of nonlinearness of it, but it's clearly a precedent, strikingly so. And Get Carter, just obviously, I mean, come on, you got a British guy. It's sort of like Get Carter comes to LA, you know, but I do think they take different things from them because the coldness of Point Blank, Lee Marvin is a very cold read on that. But on the other hand, it looks great. There are these amazing houses. There's this real sense of Southern California and LA. And I think that really is all, you know, I think the visuals and the nonlinear aspects come very strongly from Point Blank into the Limey. And I think Get Carter, you know, we're talking Newcastle, dire conditions in working class England. You know, it's fascinating to look at, but that doesn't come into the Limey so much as I think just the relentlessness of the protagonist and the strong emotional core seems to be what they drew from Get Carter.
Yeah, totally. And you know, it's funny. There's also both of them have a very cool walking scene. You have Terrence Stamp walking along the side of the building, that awesome, you know, just beautiful wide vista shot.
Yeah. And
then you have the famous Lee Marvin walking, and his footsteps, the sound of the footsteps overlaying in his girlfriend or his I know it's his ex-wife's bedroom. I want to say it's the actress's name. It's escaping me. She's in Body Double. She's in a lot of stuff. She's in a ton of TV. I'm losing it. But anyway, it's this awesome scene where Lee Marvin's walking and his footsteps you hear him really, really prominently, and they carry into this scene and that scene. It's like, again, it's like this force of nature coming after whomever. But it's funny because he just remains that force of nature and nothing else, where Stamp's character, it becomes something so much more and so much different. And that's the Get Carter thing.
So well said. So well said. And Angie Dickinson was the actress we were both trying to recall.
Gosh, I should have known that. But yes, Angie Dickinson. Getting back to this non-linear thing that we've been talking about, you know, we both agree it's the right creative choice, but it wasn't easy to execute. Soderbergh was working on a remarkably tight deadline. From pitching the movie to Artisan to its release was only 9 months.
It boggles the mind.
Yeah, there is fast and there is fast. And this is like really, really, just remarkable. Only Soderbergh can do it. Probably not surprising to many, post-production was a nightmare. The first cut of the movie, according to Soderbergh, was a mess. He screened it for friends. No one understood what was going on. He had to essentially start from scratch and reconceive the entire movie. That meant some additional shooting and a whole new cut with editor Sarah Flack. In an interview with Deadline, Soderbergh had this to say about that time. It was especially frustrating because on the heels of Out of Sight, I felt that I had finally kind of emerged from the woods of some confusion that I was in prior to Out of Sight. I was struggling to figure out what kind of filmmaker I wanted to be and to figure out what kind of films I wanted to make. And, at least in creative terms, Out of Sight felt like a real step forward, and the possibilities for me going forward from there had seemed pretty positive. So to sit there and feel like, one step forward and then after that first screening, a series of giant steps backward, that was really scary.
That is such a fascinating point. And I mean, have you ever, sorry, readers, we're going to go a little personal for a minute. Like, have you ever had the feeling that you were going backwards and not forward in your ability to write or create?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wish there was a way to like figure out the alchemy of success, and I'm sure writers or works of art, film, books, whatever, and you think, gosh, I can't believe this didn't break this person out, or how is this not a bigger hit? We say that all the time. And then once in a while we have to turn that gaze onto ourselves, and it's hard and it's painful. You think like, okay, I've got this book coming out, or I've got this comic, I've got this movie, whatever. And I'm looking at it from granted, you're very close to it, so it's hard to really see too well, but you can look at it to a certain degree and say, well, it's got all these elements. I'm working with the right people, and I feel like it's the right subject matter, and it's done so well, and it's coming out at the right time. This should work. And also, like, I'm in a good place. I'm coming off this past thing that worked. Mm-hmm. And then it doesn't. It's so maddening because, like, why? You can never figure out why did one thing work and why did another thing. Like, you can maybe sometimes, but the thing is, you think you have it figured out, and then only to have that idea utterly betrayed with the next thing that you do. So I've definitely experienced that. I remember having this one book come out. I was coming off of one successful thing, and this is with I thought was a better concept. I thought it was better done. It was with a bigger publisher. Like, it had all the things going for it. And I was like, rubbing my hands together like, ooh, baby, like I'm at the craps table. I got my weighted dice, I'm ready to take down the house. And it didn't go the way I thought it would. It wasn't by any means a disaster. The book did fine, and fine is sometimes good. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, okay, I can live with, fine. But I anticipate something bigger. I thought I was in a place to take that step, and then I didn't. And it wasn't quite a step backwards, like what Soderbergh may have been feeling, which actually didn't happen for him. But there is that feeling of like, sometimes you can remain static, and it sure as hell feels like backwards.
There's so much we can't control about the reception of our work when we put it out there. I mean, success is something we're always scratching our heads about and trying to game or figure out or whatever. And some of the moments where I thought I was most poised for a big step forward, it ended up being kind of a sideways step or a little step forward, or maybe, I can't think of an instance, but maybe even a tiny step back. But what kind of freaks me out the most is more that kind of what you alluded to, like when you feel like all the pieces are in place to create something that's really great, because that's the thing we can control. And then you feel like you don't have a handle on the material as well as you thought you did. And it's, I shared a big one last week, but like, or one of our last couple episodes, kind of greatest failure. But the thing that I've always felt most puzzled by is that, I now have 13 books out, and I would have thought that after 5 or 6 books, I kind of had it up, like I now know how to write a book. And I don't necessarily know that I know how to write a book. I know good ways to write a book, and I can absolutely write books. But each project, I feel like I'm kind of reinventing my process a little bit, not in some huge dramatic way. And I don't know if that's because I'm trying to keep things fresh or because I'm just reacting to a different problem with a different story. But again, to bring it back to Soderbergh, I feel like it kind of, again, seems like his process is to not get comfortable. I would like to ascribe to myself these great personality traits that Soderbergh has. I'm not trying to do that by any stretch because I think he's a lot smarter than I am. But I see him trying to, keep himself from getting too comfortable. Like he regularly challenges himself to do something in a different way because he likes learning a new way to do something, or to improve the way he's done something. Whereas I think that maybe earlier in my career, I kind of thought, I now know how to do this. And then you realize you can't do that. You can't, if you write a book the same way for 20 books, readers are going to fall asleep because I don't know, you have to continually challenge yourself. But it can be scary. And again, he's got that comfortable, we've said this about him before and we'll say it again, he's not afraid to fail.
Yeah, and I wonder, I wonder, you and I have similar careers in the sense that we do a lot of various things, in various mediums, various subjects, various age groups, I wonder if we're like Soderbergh in that way, like if we're conscious of the challenge, because like I know personally, so I'll give you an example. When my book Barbaric came out, which is still going on, it was very successful. I was very fortunate with that one. That was one that worked. But I remember after that time, a lot of comic publishers came to me and they're like, basically in no uncertain terms, give us another Barbaric. And again, I'm like, I can't. It's done. I've done it. I cannot go back and do it again. I can't do anything close to it. I've done it once. I can never go back there again. It's like, it's a one use thing, you know? And I wonder, sometimes, like, I don't know, like I look at somebody like, the obvious example is Stephen King or Brandon Sanderson. I wonder if it's heaven or hell that like, they're able to just do the same thing every time for years on end. I'm not saying it's the same book and I'm not diminishing them whatsoever, but like they're basically able to wake up and say, oh, what am I going to write today? Another horror book. Like, granted, yes, once in a while, Stephen King now has stepped out and done he'll do his little noir like once every 5-6 years, something like that. But generally every year, like clockwork, it is a horror something. Sanderson's a fantasy something, pick another name and you can do the same thing. And I don't know if I know that I am incapable. Mm-hmm. Like I could not do that. I can't. I've been doing this for a long time and I haven't. So like, I don't know. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like once you've done it, the earth is salted and that's it?
Maybe not quite so dramatically, but I know that like every few books of a type, like I'm going to want to move on. So yeah, I think I probably am incapable of doing that, much to the sadness of my bank balance. But when you say, is it, heaven or hell? I think we do know that for our man Soderbergh, I think that would be hell. I think that would be the definition of hell for him.
I agree. I think he really would be. I think it's something that the challenge keeps him creatively juiced.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to go then. That's a great place to go to another break. And when we come back, we'll talk about the Limey's reception.
I'm interested in layers, and I'm interested in ways to reveal character that are unorthodox. And so non-linear storytelling is a very convenient tool if you're preoccupied with new ways of telling a story. And it was something that even as a teenager I was really drawn to. When I first saw Godard films, and especially the early Alan Resnais films, I just found them incredibly compelling. I like puzzles and I like mosaics, and it was a new thing for me as a teenager to see these movies and look at cinema as something that could be built like a puzzle. Like a lot of people, I thought it always went from one end to the other and always moved in one direction. And so that was, even though, Citizen Kane's one of the more non-linear movies that you can think of. It doesn't feel like it, but it is, really. I've just always liked that.
So, Keir, as promised, we're going to talk about reception, which is pretty straightforward, which is a nice thing for all of us, Soderbergh and you and I. Like Out of Sight, critics love Limey. The San Francisco Chronicle called it a first-rate crime thriller and further proof that Soderbergh is one of our great contemporary film stylists. Great review. The LA Times, like us, noted the film's connection to 1960s cinema, saying that it's a solid genre film that offers satisfaction of the familiar while deriving its resonances through its specific and telling references to the 1960s. Our good friend Roger Ebert gave it 3 stars because that's what Ebert does.
He also called the plot basic Ross MacDonald improved by an ironic visual sensibility. That's not a direct quote, but that's more or less what he said. So he didn't seem super impressed with the material, but reasonably pleased with the execution.
Yeah, I would be okay with that. I like Ross MacDonald. If I read that, I'd say, okay,
yep,
fair enough. And I mentioned this at the top of the show. The reputation has only grown over the years. I wouldn't say rediscovered because I don't feel like it ever really truly went away the way certain films tend to go away. But it's certainly viewed as a small yet important gem in Soderbergh's crown. Outlets like Slash Film and The Ringer have all written recent pieces on it, sometimes even calling it one of Soderbergh's best. So there's a lot of praise here, stretching back over 25 years across decades. But as much as the critics of the time enjoyed it, audiences were a little less enthusiastic. Like Out of Sight, despite the praise and despite how lovingly we view these films now, The Limey didn't do all that well at the box office. It was a surprise. It was a surprise to me. I remember it being a smaller film, but I didn't recognize how small. It was budgeted at $10 million and only earned $3.2 million. So this begs the question now, how can this movie be both a failure and a success?
Man. Yeah, we're back into the red here. It's interesting because with all of Soderbergh's previous films that lost money, we can kind of see the reasons. Kafka was tonally uneven. It was black and white, and it was about Franz freaking Kafka. I want to do that in a Chicago accent. It was about Franz freaking Kafka. Hardly a recipe for commercial success. King of the Hill probably should have been more successful because it looked like a slick Hollywood film, but, it was too slow and it was just flat. The Underneath reflected Soderbergh's own lack of enthusiasm for the project. Out of Sight foreshadows Ocean's 11, which is a great cast, fun plot, lots of humor. Well, The Limey pays homage to 2 films most Americans at the time hadn't seen or, didn't remember. But as is becoming a pattern with Soderbergh, his successes pay for his box office failures. And he has another pretty big success coming right up.
He does. That's teasing. But yeah, ultimately it didn't cause a dent in Soderbergh's, he was already on to the next thing, as we'll discover.
Yep.
It's funny we mentioned how challenging post-production was for The Limey because it's that difficulty that brought Soderbergh to make Erin Brockovich. Soderbergh was offered Brockovich while shooting Out of Sight and said, and I quote, "It was the worst idea for a movie I'd ever heard," and turned it down. Then he got offered it again during post-production on The Limey and found the idea of a straightforward narrative very appealing and changed his tune completely.
Like me, he reserves the right to change his opinion at any time.
Correct. Exactly. Luckily, it was still available. In a piece celebrating the 20th anniversary of The Limey, RogerEbert.com said it perfectly. The Limey is the point when Soderbergh confidently admitted his comfort zone is the genre film. Within that structure, he could push new ways of storytelling. The learning curve part of his career is now in his rear view. He knew how to make smaller movies more efficiently and on the cheap.
And probably certainly the cheap part plays into why he keeps getting chances to make more movies, even if the cheap movies don't make much back, because they don't lose much. But, another key thing that just occurred to me is, the efficient part also matters because he shot and delivered this entire film in less than a year, which means that, people don't even have time to register if it doesn't make money before he's on to his next project. And his next project is a big success. So working fast, also makes a difference. If you're Todd Haynes and you take a long time to make a movie and then you deliver The Limey, which loses 2/3 of its budget, then people are going to be like, you're going to kind of have this stink of financial failure on you, even if you didn't lose very much. So being prolific seems to be part of Soderbergh's superpower. I think.
And sometimes, and this is like, peeking behind the curtain, adding to that, sometimes, there's various reasons that movies get made in the production side of things. It could be, hey, we've got this money and we have to use it from these investors. We've got a gap in our schedule that we have to fill. There's some reason why we need a movie done and made in 9 months. I mean, it could have been just that they wanted to fast track it because they really liked it. It could be as simple as that. But it could be another reason that, like, in terms of like a tax break or
tax incentives.
Taxes after filling in, they have to spend a certain amount of money, which sometimes happens. There's a lot of reasons why that movie gets made or needs to get made. And it goes to your point, like, you don't always have, the luxury of like, Terrence Malick time, like, and if you can do it fast and do it well enough and don't embarrass anybody, well, you get to do it again.
Yeah. Boy, for the luxury of living life on Terrence Malick time, that's what I would love. But yeah, I know we're going to be talking about his evolving lean and mean and, way of shooting like more and more as the season goes on. The Limey is where he really starts to realize that by using 2 cameras and available light, he gives the actors the most freedom to perform while making it easier to edit because he doesn't have to match takes. The actors are loose, he's loose, and the whole crew seems to be feeding off his confidence. This way of working also happens to feed his evolving visual aesthetic too.
I've gotten less and less interested in perfection or the idea of polishing things. As I make each film, I become more and more interested in mistakes, or at least imperfections that I think are more lifelike. I've stopped rehearsing scenes as much so that even the operators, whether it's myself or another operator, aren't exactly sure what's going on. I rarely give actors marks anymore. We'll do general markings in the room, but I won't tell the actor that they have to hit anything precisely, that we'll just follow them.
At the top of the show, Mike, you pointed out that 1999 was a great year for cinema. With Out of Sight and The Limey, how do you think Soderbergh fits into the scene?
Weirdly, I don't think he does. Soderbergh isn't a guy, at least in my opinion, who fits into any scene. And he certainly is an artist who's ever been concerned with something, as superficial as his brand. And it's something that he has said himself. If anything, Soderbergh's brand is being smarter than everyone else and staying ahead of the game.
Lem Dobbs' brand, meanwhile, is being obsessed with reading reviews and feeling misunderstood.
Hi-oh. We're just going to attack lobs. Oh, no. That was an unintentional dig. Good old lobs. We said it in a previous episode how Soderbergh was starting to see the problems with the indie film scene, particularly with distribution, which is a real thing. He says himself, you can make movies, but you can't always get them seen. What movies do get seen? Studio films. He's learning that if he wants to keep making movies and have them capture an audience, he has to play ball with the studios. That doesn't mean he has to be a hack, because he's not. In fact, as we'll see, he creatively flourishes in his bigger budget efforts. But the point is, like he was with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, knowingly or not, Soderbergh's ahead of the curve. Indie filmmakers went studio in 1999. Well, Soderbergh was already there in 1998 with Out of Sight. And he's starting to learn his system, one for them, one for me. The $50 million Out of Sight, then the $10 million The Limey. It's a model that would define his career for years to come.
Yeah, and if we can find this quote, I remember he said something really great too, which is kind of like, well, why should a great filmmaker have to, make a film for $3 million? Like, why can't somebody who's cool and artsy and hip or whatever, like, make a $30 million film? I think we should probably cut out the audio of me saying this and just find that fucking quote, because but it's a great capper to your point, because he basically is just sort of like, I refuse to define myself as a low budget filmmaker, is effectively what he's saying.
There's really no label, there's no box, there's nothing that really can contain Steven Soderbergh. And again, we've said it before, that's why we love him, but I think that's what we're seeing. Like, it's not just, I don't think he gives himself enough credit, because like I was saying, like, it's not just that, like, the creative impulses. Like, Soderbergh's really smart. Like, Soderbergh can look around, he can read what's happening, and he can say, okay, here's where I need to go. Here's where the lane is. I've got to get into that. And he really, that's probably the smartest thing that he did in that pivot, and what he learned in Out of Sight was like all those gears clicked where he's like, okay, I have to have studio involved, and I have to learn how to navigate that creatively, but I have to have studios involved. I have to stay ahead of where everybody else is going. You know, like you're going to see, like I said, those 1999 filmmakers, a lot of them flame out. You know, a lot of them are still trying to make like, you know, the precious art film. They're getting a little more money because studios are like, okay, these movies are making money. But the minute, this is how all entertainment goes, the minute the money goes away, so goes the movies. So goes the artists.
Yeah, and that's a time when a lot of the indies were becoming, you know, studio indies effectively, but maybe they were still acting, you know, like your David O. Russell's kind of like they didn't have to play ball with a larger group of players. And meanwhile, you know, Soderbergh is playing the long game.
How you doing then? All right, are you? Now look, Squire, you're the governor here, I can see that. I'm on your manor now, so there's no need to get your knickers in a twist. Whatever this bollocks is that's going down between you and that slave Valentine, it's got nothing to do with me. I couldn't care less, all right, mate? Let me explain to you. When I was in prison, second time, no, tell a lie, third stretch. Yeah, third. There was this screw what really had it in for me, and that geezer was top of my list. 2 years after I got sprung, I sees him in Olive Park. He's sitting on a bench feeding bloody pigeons. There was no one about. I could have gone up behind him and snapped his fucking neck. Wallop. But I left him. I could have nobbled him, but I didn't. Because what I thought I wanted wasn't what I wanted. What I thought I was thinking about was something else. I didn't give a toss. It didn't matter, see? This Burke on the bench wasn't worth my time. It meant sod all in the end, because you've got to make a choice. When to do something and when to let it go. When it matters and when it don't. Bide your time. That's what prison teaches you, if nothing else. Bide your time and everything becomes clear, and you can act accordingly.
There's one thing I don't understand. The thing I don't understand is every motherfucking word you're saying.
Bide your time, Wilson said, and everything becomes clear. You can act accordingly. Kind of sounds like Soderbergh's career at this moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. To quote Seeger again, he really hit the nail on the head when he wrote, you know, just as Wilson is a character out of sorts with his environment, Soderbergh is a big name, award-winning filmmaker, consistently at odds with whatever Hollywood is pushing onto audiences, even in his crowd pleasers. Man out of step in the best way possible.
Yeah.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and take a moment to give us a good rating or review on your platform of choice. Even better, tell a film-loving friend to join us on our journey to watch all the films of Steven Soderbergh. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Filmographers, or X at Filmographer Pod, or on Letterboxd.
Special thanks to Kevin Lau, our producer, Gompson, who composed our theme, and Cosmo Graff, who designed our logo. If you have feedback, suggestions, or want to share a fun Soderbergh fact, please email us at thefilmographerspodcast@gmail.com.
Next week on the Filmographers Podcast, we'll follow Steven Soderbergh into yet another timeline, the 21st century, and an alternate reality in which he dominates both the box office and award season.